I'm anonymous me.
Welcome to Step 12 in What's the Big Book Actually Saying? Part 1. Yes, Part 1. There's quite a lot to cover in Step 12. When you look at the Big Book, it gets its own chapter, working with others. Not the smallest chapter in the Big Book either. So we're going to chunk it up. Otherwise, the video would simply be too long. So we're going to look at the first couple of pages of working with others, and that covers sort of a short introduction section, which contains, well, to me, a second paragraph that almost reads like promises. And I've never heard them called the Step 12 promises, but make your own mind up, I guess. And also what to do when you discover a prospect for AA. Interesting term, isn't it? I've never felt like a prospector for AA, but there you go. Let's have a look at the step and how it reads. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. Now, you'll notice that's on page 60. It's the only step that appears on its own page. The first 11 steps appear on page 59, and then you must literally turn the page over to read the 12th step. And I think that's quite significant. I'm not saying they did it on purpose, but it worked out kind of well, because what this is saying, if we look at it, the way it's written, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, what are these steps? Well, I read it as the first 11. I don't think there's any other way to read it, to be honest. So literally all of the stuff we did on page 59, turning the page, having had an awakening spiritually as a result of doing these things, what do we do now on this brand new page? Which is the way it felt to me. I had this spiritual awakening, and then, I literally turned a page, perhaps even in a whole chapter in my life. We tried to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. Now, in the context of this step and how it reads, we tried to carry this message. What message? Well, the way I interpret that, and look, it's just an individual member's interpretation. The message I'm carrying in the context of this sentence is the message that I've had a spiritual awakening. I've actually not cured, but solved my drinking problem. What a great message to carry to someone who's still struggling with alcohol. Now, this chapter talks a lot about working with newcomers, but not necessarily sponsorship. I have had conversations with people that think this is where you learn to be a sponsor. Now, I think it's where you learn general principles for working with newcomers in particular, but not necessarily sponsorship. Sponsorship came along a little bit later than the Big Book did. And if you want to know all about sponsorship, what we have is a marvelous pamphlet, questions and answers on sponsorship. It's just as conference approved as the Big Book itself. And because neither the Big Book or the 12 and 12 outline the exactitude of what sponsorship is and perhaps what it isn't, I feel that this pamphlet has equivalency to the 12 and 12 in the Big Book. It's new information that neither text covers. And I find I reread this on a regular basis, this pamphlet, because I think it's probably the biggest responsibility I have in my life beyond my work and paying off my mortgage and all that sort of stuff. The idea of sponsoring a newcomer into recovery, being particularly involved in their recovery, as this pamphlet suggests a sponsor should. It's a big responsibility. I mean, their life is on the line like mine. And this chapter or step is also based on an assumption, and perhaps it's the only one that is, that the person carrying out its suggestions has had a spiritual awakening. And I think that was very significant for me. I didn't sponsor anyone until I felt I was living in the sunlight of the Spirit, at least to some extent, that I had something of a personal experience of being a recovered alcoholic. And that was what I was offering as part of my sponsorship. And I certainly think in the past tense, the word had being in step 12, that is really significant. Okay, anyway, let's look at what having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps we tried to carry this message to alcoholics looks like. Let's go to the Big Book itself. This is the first two paragraphs. And as I say, The second one reads a bit like promises. Practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. Really important information, isn't it? That, when all else feels like it's failing and the thought of a drink is in my mind and perhaps the mental obsession that I can drink normally, this insane thinking is kicking in. The best thing I can do is get to a meeting? No. Call my sponsor? No. Work with other alcoholics. Carry this message to someone who hasn't heard it yet. That's the best suggestion. It works when other activities fail. This is our 12th suggestion. Carry this message to other alcoholics. You can help when no one else can. So this is this whole helping others thing. I remember when I was in early recovery, and there are days where I still do this, I actually go to Alcoholics Anonymous for help. Well, the suggestion here is, go do that, but when all else is failing, spin the table, reverse things. Go help someone instead. You can secure their confidence when others fail. Remember, they are very ill. So this idea of someone who's been drinking, maybe even still a bit drunk, they are ill. They're in the full flight of their disease. No remission, all symptoms. And it goes back to the 1930s, Dr. Silkworth saying to Bill and some of the other founding members of AA, I give up. I think you guys have a solution I can't offer. You go do it. This is the real foundation stuff of AA. Saving other people's lives, or at least giving them the opportunity to help them save their own. Let's continue with what I see as promises. Life will take on a new meaning. To watch people recover, to see them help others, to watch loneliness vanish, to see a fellowship grow up about you, to have a host of friends. This is an experience you must not miss. There's another must. We know you will not want to miss it. Frequent contact with newcomers and with each other is the bright spot of our lives. What's interesting is this, we know something about you. We know you won't want to, it's a bit bossy, right? There's a real do this, do that tone to this whole chapter, working with others, that isn't necessarily there to the same extent in previous chapters. It's a real how-to manual. I read it as a how-to guide for doing a whole lot of things, having had a spiritual awakening. So the tone of the big book becomes very instructional. And how instructional? Let's find out. Because when you read these promises, okay, so what do I have to do? How do I tap into this? How can I play my part? I'm ready to. Well, what we do is we start reading sections that are introduced as follows. So this is the start of the next sentence. When you discover a prospect for AA, ... which reads like a section heading. And when you read the next page or two of the big book, what you get is a series of paragraphs and sentences within paragraph that actually read as separate instructions. To reveal that, I'm going to read to you how many? 20 specific suggestions. One might see them as instructions that line up, that actually cover all the material. And I'm going to number them to make it easier to see. But they're not 20 things we have to do. Some are options to pick from for the same situation. So you could either do this or that sort of thing. But I am going to make it as invitational as possible for 2020. So traditionalists beware, I have turned the he being constantly referred to in this section into a they. Why? To make it easier for some of us to identify. Okay. The big book's job is to invite people in, not push them away. And 2022 is not 1939, so the world's changed a bit. So hopefully by just changing the he to a they, and I hope I've done it completely. If I've missed one or two, I apologise in advance. Hopefully that will help us see what the big book is actually saying, which has nothing to do with he, she or they. It's got everything to do with these profound ideas that can keep people alive and grow people spiritually. Let's begin. When you discover a prospect for AA, find out all you can about them. So our first job is to humbly research. What do I know about this person? They're a human being. They've got a different story than mine. I need to ask questions, not make statements. A big one for me. I think when I started working with alcoholics, I used to tell them things, speak at them as if they knew nothing and I knew everything. But AA is not boot camp. I need to use inquiry, not speech making. If they do not want to stop drinking, don't waste time trying to persuade them. You may spoil a later opportunity. That's such an important one. Again, I probably used to push a lot when I was trying to help people in the early days. Oh, you've got to have you've got to have what I have, and all this sort of stuff. But no, don't have to do that. Okay, if they're not into it, I shouldn't persuade them. If we look pushy and they're not ready, they may never come back. This advice is given for the family also. They should be patient, realising they are dealing with a sick person. You know, when you're on the phone lines for AA, your experience may be similar to mine, which has been that often non-alcoholics ring. It's over 50% of the time in my case. It'll be family members or, you know, spouses or brothers and sisters of someone who's struggling with alcohol. And this third piece of advice is a tough one to give because I don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that if this person's not ready, they have to be patient. But it's one of our suggestions, and I always follow through and honour that suggestion. And, you know, I think it helps those people in the long run. If there is any indication that they want to stop, have a good talk with the person most interested in them, usually a spouse or a partner. I've changed that for a wife. So, you know, if there is, oh no, they're saying they really want to stop, they're desperate, they just don't know how. Well, great, let's have a chat. I know you're not the alcoholic. I know you're close to the alcoholic. Going back to the first suggestion here, tell me all about this person. Get an idea of their behaviour, problems, background, the seriousness of their condition, and their religious leanings. You need this information to put yourself in their place. And I love this suggestion. Again, don't be pushy. Don't be the experienced alcoholic with all the answers. Be the opposite of that. We need to see how you would like them to approach you if the tables were turned. It's this idea of, you know, you can't do 12-step work with a stranger. You don't know how to approach them, and your job is to find the approach that's right for them, not use the same cookie-cutter stock standard approach with every newcomer. You know, that's what's being suggested here, a tailored approach based on your humble inquiry about that person's particular situation. And I've found that also tells me how to use my story, my experience, strength and hope to connect with this person. So it's all about effective communication at the end of the day. Let's continue. Sometimes it is wise to wait until they go on a binge. The family may object to this, but unless they are in a dangerous physical condition, it is better to risk it. This goes back to that suggestion in there as a solution. You know, if someone says they're not sure if they've got the allergy or not, tell them to go drinking and stop it too. Or this is a variation of that. Well, you know, if they haven't had a drink in 10 days, they may be a bit cocky about that. Let's see if they can swear off and stay sworn off. So if they've just basically, you know, capitulated, there might be a better time to talk about this when the evidence is they've got a control problem. Don't deal with them when very drunk unless they are ugly and the family needs your help. Now, the key word is very. Let's all remember that when, in Bill's story, Bill's friend, whom we know was Ebby Thatcher, sat down with Bill and shared his experience, strength and hope, his spiritual solution. Bill wasn't sober, but he perhaps wasn't very drunk either. When you look at what Bill reflects on as he hears Ebby share, it's not necessarily the reflections of a very drunk person, just a somewhat drunk person. So, you know, it's one of the things we need to assess. If they're very drunk, obviously, you know, maybe get them to call you in the morning. But if they're not very drunk, then perhaps we have a great opportunity to share. Wait for the end of the spree, or at least for a lucid interval. Then let their family or a friend ask them if they want to quit for good or if they would go to any extreme to do so. Now, that's almost a variation of step 3. It's almost like, well, okay, even though this person doesn't know anything about alcoholism necessarily, what it is, or our solution, how serious are they about quitting? Because, you know, it's really interesting to get a sense of that, because that might give you information as to how that person needs to approach the steps sooner or later, for example. You know, if there's a gut feeling, I am ready to turn my life around no matter what, well, then you've got 90 odd pages of the big book to get through quite quickly. But if they're like, no, I don't want to, I'm not interested at all in quitting for good. I just want to lay off for a while. Well, that might, if you do become this person's sponsor, give you vital information as to how to approach that role. Who knows what you'll get out of that 8th suggestion, but it's a really critical one, I find. If they say yes, then their attention should be drawn to you as a person who has recovered. So ultimately, I find if I go back to the phone line suggestion, here's my number, personal number, or you've always got the 1300 number as well. But if you think that I might be a good person to talk to, for this person to talk to, then family member, friend, please pass it on. Because I have recovered. I'm a recovered alcoholic. And I went to an AA presentation recently where another member said, it's really important when we speak to people outside of AA that we tell them we're not recovering, we're recovered. And in fact, it got me thinking, it's true. I am a recovered alcoholic. I'm currently in full remission, displaying no symptoms of alcoholism. I'm not drunk, I'm not triggering the allergy, nor am I forgetting my drinking history. So mentally and physically, the two sides of alcoholism, I'm in full recovery. Therefore, I'm recovered. You should be described to them as one of a fellowship. They'll know who AA is by now. This is not 1939 anymore. As a part of their own recovery, try to help others, and we'll be glad to talk to them if they care to see you. It's very important we debunk the idea that this is a professional task that we're performing, that in fact we're doing it to maintain our own recovery. Please give us the chance to be more sober today by helping that person today. And often, the family member or friend is like, what, really? You don't do this for money? No, I don't do this for money. This is not how AA works. And so, even our traditions are sometimes worth sharing, some of them at least. This is not a professional thing. And AA is just about members helping members. Really important stuff. 11, halfway. If they do not want to see you, never force yourself upon them. Such an important thing. 12, neither should the family hysterically plead with them to do anything, nor should they tell them much about you. So, a lot of the work we do, therefore, when we discover a prospect for AA, a potential newcomer, is to work with those people who we may have contact with first and go, look, you can't push, and I'd rather tell them my story firsthand. I've told you my story, but maybe keep most of that away from their ears so that I can actually hit their ears with my story first. 13, they should wait for the end of their next drinking bout. You might place this book where they can see it. In the interval, here no specific rule can be given. The family must decide these things. It's funny, in my previous relationship, my sister-in-law, who is not an alcoholic, did this. And I shared with her a couple of, months into my recovery in AA. I'm a member of AA. And she said, oh, yeah, I know all about AA. I'm not a member myself, but whenever I know there's someone in my social circle or family who has a problem with alcohol, I buy them this book, the big book, and I give it to them. Now, I don't know where she got that idea from, but here it is sitting in the book itself. Fascinating. She didn't give it to me, by the way, when I was out there drinking, so I must have been pretty good at hiding my alcoholism. Or maybe she was just going through a tight time and didn't have the money. I don't know. I don't even know where she bought the book from. 14, but urge them not to be over anxious, for that might spoil matters. Yeah, so it's always that idea of, hey, family members, just take it easy. And if we just don't put any pressure on this person you love who's drinking, who you wish to get sober, maybe they'll start to, love themselves and wish to get sober too. And then I'm happy to have a chat with them. 15, usually the family should not try to tell your story. So there it is, a reiteration of what we've already read in that 12th suggestion. 16, when possible, avoid meeting a person through their family. Approach through a doctor or an institution is a better bet. So moving away from the idea of speaking to family and friends, now as this is about public information nearly, or at least outreach to professionals, This is why, with my group here in country Victoria, Australia, we do try and develop a relationship with the local police, the local hospital, the local doctors, GPs in particular, because we want them to consider, we can't push them either, these professional people, to consider getting in touch with us if one of their clients may have a problem that we can assist them with. 17, if your prospect needs hospitalisation, they should have it, but not forcibly unless they are violent. Let the doctor, if he or she will, tell the prospect they have something in the way of a solution. So once again, reaching out to professional people becomes a core part of our recovery. I think this is really significant, very easy to miss when you're reading the big book for the first time, but the idea of groups reaching out to professionals in their area is an absolutely key part of our step 12. It's how we get to meet the alcoholics who we work with. 18, I should say. When your prospect is better, the doctor might suggest a visit from you. So this is why that relationship needs to be really effective, because the doctor is now trusting, for example, me or you as a member of the fellowship to work with one of their clients. That's an act of faith, an act of trust. 19. Though you have talked with the family, leave them out of the first discussion. Under these conditions, your prospect will see they are under no pressure. They will feel they can deal with you without being nagged by family. This is almost a summary of a lot of the previous suggestions we've just been reading. 20. Call on them while they are still jittery. They may be more receptive when depressed. And that's when we move on to the second set of suggestions about a slightly different topic about what to do when you have that conversation with the actual prospect. So as you can see, there's a real how-to flavour, a set of instructions that allow us to do and say things in a very explicit way. And this needs, I find, for me, to be reread on a regular basis. So we can start to see the patterns in these suggestions, the idea of inquiry, the idea of tailoring each interaction with each person who is involved in a prospect's potential recovery, be it the family member, the friend, the doctor or professional person, and the alcoholic themselves. And the conversation with the alcoholic themselves, I should say prospective alcoholic, we can't assume they're alcoholic. They haven't looked at any information about step 1 yet. Let's assume they don't know what alcoholism is. That's coming up in part 2. So on that note, have a happy, sober day. Until next time.